Joshua Craner, and I teach 6th grade at Emerson Elementary.
Okay. What is your relationship to the Great Salt Lake?
I've lived in Utah my entire life, and so I love the Great Salt Lake. I think it's an amazing ecosystem. I went there as a kid with my family. I've watched the bison, playing around on Antelope Island, and played in the water before. And with my students, we learn about science, and ecosystems is a big thing in 6th grade. And so every year for the past 6 years, I've been taking students out there to learn about that ecosystem and what's happening to the lake as it's drying up.
Okay. So how'd you come up with the idea of teaching kids about the brine shrimp and making them the state crustacean?
So over these last 6 years that we've been studying it, Jamie Butler at Westminster, so she was working for the Great Salt Lake Institute up there at Westminster College. She's been a resource for us, giving us supplies to be able to go and learn about the Great Salt Lake. And she's also come on Zoom to help answer questions after we went on our field trips. And so her and I have just gotten to know each other over the years. And my students and I last year were like, what else can we do? Because we knew that the Great Salt Lake was shrinking and is continuing to shrink. And we knew that that was really dangerous for our state, for our valley. So we asked her, what else can we do? And her and another student have been throwing around an idea of trying to make the brine shrimp the state crustacean to bring more awareness to the Great Salt Lake. And so she asked if we would be the face of that and having students, because when people see small students, wanting something and passionate about something, it tends to move their hearts a little bit more as well. But it also gives these kids a chance to understand activism, understand the political process. They wrote letters to representatives and senators saying, please protect the Great Salt Lake. So with the brine shrimp, it was another step that we could take.
So you said talking about representatives you wrote to. Do you know which one you were talking, who you were talking to about?
So Jamie Butler had reached out to a House representative to ask if he would sponsor the bill. He doesn't support state symbols, and so he wasn't going to do that. But he sent Jamie to Rosemary Lesser, so Representative Lesser, and she was on board to be able to sponsor the bill. Then we had to have somebody that would sponsor the bill in the Senate, and so Representative Lesser connected with Derek Kitchen for that.
Okay. What was it like last year pushing for this bill or project?
We started a little bit late. The idea came up later in the year, and the legislative session starts in January and only goes for a specific amount of time. So we did get it into the meetings. We presented it first at a House committee meeting. So 3 of my students, my whole class went up there actually, and 3 of my students wrote speeches that they presented to the representatives on that committee. It passed there. Then they went to the House floor and did a vote. It passed there. Then it went over to the Senate and it had to go to a committee there where Derek Kitchen was sponsoring it. It passed there. It went from there to the Senate floor, and it was there the very last day of the legislative session. And sadly, it ran out of time. It was midnight. I was watching it, and it was right there. There was a couple more in front of it, and they ran out of time. And so that means everything that we did has to start all over. So we have to start from scratch, or from ground zero again, and then build it. So we're going to be starting this year earlier. So we've already reached out. We're going to be actually this week reaching out to Representative Lesser and asking her to sponsor it again.
Thea, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, what do you love about brine shrimp?
I love how tiny they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I find it interesting how a small animal can be such an important part of an ecosystem.
I'll ask you next. Why do you want the brine shrimp to become the state crustacean?
Mostly because there's a bird, I think it's the ear grebe bird that eats the brine shrimp. And so the brine shrimp also eat algae, a specific kind of algae. Mostly that's because why it's so green, because the brine shrimp are dead in the spring. But the reason why, if the brine shrimp die, the birds have nothing to eat, and there's 10 million birds that eat them. So if they die, 10 million birds, they'll either die or they just won't have something to eat, or they'll have to find. Also, so far from what I've heard is our brine shrimp can only live in salt water. So and there's no saltwater lakes besides the Great Salt Lake that we know of. And so if the Great Salt Lake dies, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that they'll probably go extinct.
And then, why is it important to protect the Great Salt Lake?
Because in around 2 to 3 years, if we don't do anything about it, then the Great Salt Lake will totally evaporate, and the brine shrimp will go extinct in the Great Salt Lake. But the brine shrimp are the keystone species of the Great Salt Lake, and so all the birds, all the animals, they all just go down, and the whole environment will collapse.
What can we do you think, to help the lake?
I think if we don't collect stuff from it, and maybe if we don't collect stuff from it, it won't take out stuff, it won't take out the lake, so then it won't go down as much. I guess because of all the things that people have done, global warming, pollution, and all that, it's just making the lake shrink. So if we made more inventions that don't cause the earth to get worse, then the lake may not shrink.
Mm-hmm. So stuff with water and stuff like that and everything?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, and then what do you hope to accomplish with this class in terms of the brine shrimp?
So, the biggest goal is for us to be able to pass this bill to make it the state crustacean. And though that doesn't actually protect the brine shrimp, it doesn't offer any money for it, what it does is bring more awareness to the Great Salt Lake. And right now, the reality is if it continues to shrink at the rate it is, in the next 2 years, all the brine shrimp will be dead. And if that happens, that ecosystem will fall apart. And so we're really at a tipping point, and if something isn't done in these next few years. And so the hope is that by presenting this bill again, we're bringing it back in front of these legislators who are making decisions about the Great Salt Lake. And though a lot of bills were passed last year that were awesome, there needs to be a lot more movement with that. And so I'm hoping that my students also will learn that they can be a part of the process, that they can speak up for things and they can be heard, and that even though they're young, they can have a voice and help to see things change. And so we're hoping for positive change to take place for the Great Salt Lake and continuing to bring awareness to the importance of it.
Yeah. What kind of effect has your class made on the statement about the Great Salt Lake?
I think for adults to hear kids being passionate about something helps them to wake up more. So them being involved with this bill, then presenting it to these legislators, one of the things that we saw with these legislators is smiles on their faces. So it brings a joy to their jobs. It helps them wake up in what's, the mundane of sometimes that their jobs can be, and realizing that they are helping kids to become a part of the process, which I think is really important. So I think the kids being a face for this is helping other people to understand, if kids can be passionate about that, if kids realize how important it is, if kids realize what's happening to the Great Salt Lake, adults really should too. Adults really have no excuse for not knowing why it's so important if these small 11 and 12-year-olds can have this information. And they know a lot about the brine shrimp and a lot about the Great Salt Lake. And so I think it's humbling for the adults, but it also gives them a little bit of spark. This is important not for them as adults, but for these kids, because they're the ones that are going to be inheriting this valley. They're going to be leading this state in the future. And so our hope is that the kids inspire them to do better with the decisions that they're making.